Very good evening to everyone here tonight. I invite you to turn in your Bibles with me to the book of Mark, Mark chapter 10. We will be there in just a moment. If you had the chance to be great, would you take it? Now, that's kind of a vague question. Kind of depends on what exactly it is that I'm asking, but just your initial thoughts to that question. If you had the chance to be great, would you? Let me give a little illustration to kind of serve as an example for that. I want you to imagine for a moment that you are part of a huge corporation, like really big company. Like picture in your mind's eye the biggest company that you can think of, richest, most famous, most powerful in the world right now. Perhaps even some of the companies that some of you work for in this very Silicon Valley. But imagine that you're pretty high up in this company and there's a president, obviously, who is ahead of you, president, owner, founder. But what's interesting about this company is that there's not really anyone directly under him. Like there is just the president, there's no vice president, there's no chief officer of, fill in the blank, whatever. It's just the president and then you kind of in a pot with several other people in the step below the president. And so you're thinking in a corporate setting like that, how can I move up? How can I get the best job? That's what a lot of people think. That's what drives them and motivates them. And so they don't see someone filling a vice president role, and the president hasn't appointed anyone. No one seems to be really interested in it. At least they haven't stepped up to the president to say so. And so you think in your mind, well, maybe I ought to ask about it. Like maybe I could be the vice president. Like this group of people, it's not really much of a differentiating factor. I want to take that next step up. And if I go and talk to this president, who I already have a pretty good relationship with, like he knows me, I've talked with him and we've worked together, then maybe he'll say yes. And if he says yes, then all of a sudden that's going to boost me up pretty high. I'm going to have a lot of perks in my life now. I'm going to get a higher pay. I'm going to have some power. I'm going to get to tell other people what to do, and that's pretty cool. And so you go and you talk to that president, wanting all of those perks. Now, that makes sense in a corporate setting, and some of you might even do that if you were in that direct situation. But it's not just the corporate setting that that sort of mentality has been found. In fact, it's found right here in the Bible. And what I asked you to turn to in Mark chapter 10, this time not in a corporation, but in the company of Jesus. Look at Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, that is Jesus, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory. So kind of picture them and what they're thinking about coming into this situation. In their mind's eye, they're thinking, well, we have a pretty good relationship with Jesus already, but he doesn't really seem to have a vice president role, and maybe we could get that because of our relationship with him. What they're asking for, the right and left hand of Jesus, is basically a second position, vice president, and then the position right after that on the left hand when he comes into his glory and in his kingdom. And there's already 12 of these apostles, and that's not really much of a differentiating factor. They want to take that next step up. They want to be at the right and left hand of Jesus. Jesus handles this with grace and he's patient with them, but I kind of wonder if there's part of him that's not thinking, this again? Like, are you kidding me? Because this is not the first time that this sort of discussion has been brought up, right? It happens all across the Gospels. In fact, if you turn back to the previous chapter in Mark chapter 9, you see Jesus already have to address this. This was read a moment for us in our scripture reading, but I want to read it again real quick. Mark 9, starting in verse 33. Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, What was it you disputed among yourselves on the road? But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest. And he sat down, called the 12, and he said to them, If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. He took a little child and set him in the midst of them, and when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, Whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. So Jesus has already tried to deal with this discussion and kind of squash this mentality of greatness that they're talking about amongst themselves, but it wasn't enough. And even after this, if you look into Luke's account, in Luke chapter 22, when Jesus is spending some of his last moments with his apostles before he's about to go through all the events of his death, guess what? They're still arguing about this question, still disputing amongst themselves who is going to be the greatest. That's what you see Jesus have to tackle here in Mark chapter 10. These guys, James and John, thinking they have a good relationship with him, coming to him and asking for this. They wanted to be great. And so, what you see in this passage and what we're going to look at here this evening is Jesus teach some lessons about that idea of greatness, about what real greatness is. They had in their minds what greatness was. They came to Jesus with some preconceived notions, their world definition of greatness. Jesus is going to kind of squash that a little bit, and then he's going to offer his own definitions of greatness. And so that's how we're going to kind of dissect this passage here tonight. So, first off, in those first few verses, as James and John come and speak to Jesus, we see that they ask once again to sit at his right and his left hand, thinking in their minds of what his kingdom and his glory is going to look at. But Jesus says, you don't really know what you're asking for. Greatness is not really all it's cracked up to be, at least according to the world's definition of it. So I want to read these verses one more time. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant us that we may sit one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? So as they come to Jesus, having in their minds their standard of greatness and glory, what were they thinking about? And were they thinking along the same wavelengths of Jesus? Well, obviously not, but what was their wavelength? What was going through their mind? Well, what you see throughout the Gospels is that their focus is on a physical kingdom, physical glory, and power. In fact, what's so ironic about James and John coming to Jesus specifically right here in this passage is what Jesus had just got finished telling them in the previous verses of context. Look back up to verse 32. Now they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going before them, and they were amazed. And as they followed, they were afraid. Then he took the 12 aside again and began to tell them the things that would happen to him. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes. They will condemn him to death, deliver him to the Gentiles, and they will mock him, scourge him, and spit on him, and kill him. And the third day he will rise again. So they're making their way to Jerusalem, and you see the kind of different interactions that the apostles have with him and what's going through their mind, how they're thinking, really, Jesus? Like, this is what you're going out to do? They're amazed on one hand because Jesus is showing quite some guts, going to Jerusalem, the hotbed of Jewish persecution against him, people that want him dead, who he's already had run-ins with. That's amazing. Also prompts them to be pretty afraid of what's going to happen when he actually gets there. And he directly tells them, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be brutally betrayed and condemned and put on a cross, and I'm going to die. Jesus knows what's awaiting him when he goes to Jerusalem, and he's trying to teach them this is the true Messiah. This is what the true Messiah has been set out to do, and this is what I am going to do. And they didn't understand that. They were still looking for a physical kingdom, the physical Messiah that is going to give them wealth and power, prosperity, Jewish influence. They are going to reign supreme here on the earth. That was their version of greatness. That's what they were looking for. That's what they were asking when they're coming to Jesus. And you kind of see that in the way that the world thinks about greatness too. If I were to poll a lot of different people out in the world, what does it mean to be great? People would probably say something along the lines of, well, having power and money and fame, having the ability to change things in the world. That's what greatness is. And sometimes we ourselves have kind of daydreams and visions of greatness and what would happen if greatness came into our life. What if we got to be great? You ever kind of gone through those thoughts before? For me growing up, it was, what if I was able to win the lottery? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Then I could like be great. And I kind of went through the scenario in my mind of, okay, if I won this much money, this is what I would spend it on. Like I'd get a really nice house in a certain part of the country and a nice car, and I could travel the world and never have to worry about money ever again. It would be great, and I would be great, and I could buy great things. I want to read a little story to you. William Post III. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy before, probably not. But William Post III, back in 1988, won the Pennsylvania lottery. He won $16.2 million, which is a lot of money. In fact, today, a couple weeks ago, I was driving outside and I saw like $300 million on the billboard. So you could get even more than that, but still, 60 million, nothing to scoff at. We would love to have that plopped into our bank accounts right now. But that's not exactly how his account ended up. Very soon after, he fell victim to crime, to bankruptcy, to tragedy, and to poor spending habits. In 2 weeks after he had received his first annual payment of nearly $500,000, he had already blown two-thirds of it. He purchased a restaurant, a used car lot, and an airplane. His reckless spending continued. Within 3 months, he was $500,000 in debt, but numbers were actually the least of his problems. Post's brother was arrested for hiring a hitman to try to kill him and his sixth wife. His relatives convinced him to invest in worthless business ventures. His landlady duped him into handing over a third of his cash. Don't really know how that one happened. He ultimately filed for bankruptcy, and he faced a stint in jail for firing a gun at a bill collector. In 1993, he said, "Everybody dreams of winning money, but nobody realizes the nightmares that come out of the woodwork or the problems." And going into this situation, it would seem hard for anything but good to come for him. He lived a pretty hard knock life, growing up in orphanages, had a nomadic young adulthood, and according to reporters, he was surviving on disability payments, had a mere $2.46 in his bank account the day he won millions. Still, the win did little to improve his lot in life, and he claimed, "I was much happier when I was broke." Died of respiratory failure at the age of 66, leaving behind now his seventh wife and 9 children from his second marriage. That is not a unique story. Actually, I could have chosen quite a few to include instead of that one. And you might think, well, I would be smarter than that. I would never do anything like that. That wouldn't happen to me. I'm sure that's exactly what they would have said too going into this. Maybe greatness isn't all it's cracked up to be. What about the dreams that we have as kids becoming president of the United States? You ever seen the before and afters of the guys that are presidents? They come out with a couple more gray hairs on their head than when they went into it, right? But that's the world's definition of greatness. In fact, you kind of see some of that dichotomy even in the Bible with some of the characters. Think just for a moment briefly about the character of David, like one of the greatest characters in the Bible. Didn't he live kind of two different lives? There was a life of David as king in Jerusalem and the life of David before he became king. Now, which one was greater? Well, if you were to ask many people, of course it would be the David who reigned in Jerusalem, the one who had all of these things, money and fame and power and victory. But it wasn't until David became king in Jerusalem in which he really kind of hit some downfalls. No, really, the highest moments of David's life is when he was that shepherd boy, when he was on the run from Saul, when he was forced to rely on God for everything. James and John, they come to Jesus and with their thoughts of greatness in their mind, and Jesus says, "You don't know what you ask for." And maybe we don't either when it comes to our definition of greatness, at least if we're going according to the world standards. And so Jesus, knowing what's going on in their heads, he prompts a different definition of greatness. Those will be the next two lessons we look at. Start back in verse 38. Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they said to him, "Yeah, we are able." So Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized with, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared." Jesus teaches that greatness comes with preparation. It's not an automatic thing that just jumps into your bank account. It takes time. Now, James and John didn't know what they were asking, but they still kind of naively push forward. When Jesus says, "Hey, you don't know what you're asking for. Can you drink this cup? Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with?" And they say, "Yeah, we are able." Jesus says, "Yeah, you're going to, but you just don't get it right now." Now, when Jesus talks about this idea of drinking the cup and being baptized in this way, what is he referring to? Because obviously he's not talking literally. They could drink a cup, they could be baptized. No, it was more than that. Jesus here is talking about the purifying preparation of suffering that he was going to go through in his life and that they were going to have to go through in their life also. When you think about the life of Jesus, he was being prepared all along in this way. He had to suffer. He was learning what it was like to drink the cup in real time. That's the mission of Jesus that he came down to fulfill. And in fact, to kind of illustrate this, turn over to Hebrews real quick with me. Hebrews chapter 5 talks about this idea. Hebrews chapter 5, I'm going to start reading. Let me start reading in verse 5. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 5. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, "You are my son. Today I've begotten you." As he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Let me tell you what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that Jesus had to learn how to get out of being disobedient. It wasn't that he was disobedient and then all of a sudden he had to learn what it was like to be obedient. No, what it means is that Jesus was learning on the fly experientially what it was like to be a human, to live this human life, to undergo hardships and trials, and to make decisions based off of his circumstances in life. And that was all leading up to his final moments. And Jesus was human and it was hard. It was difficult, as all suffering is. In fact, just a couple chapters up from where we've been looking in Mark 10, you see Jesus in Mark chapter 14 in a garden saying, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." Jesus was having to go through his final moments of preparation. He was going to drink that cup in its entirety. And that's what had to happen before Jesus became great. And guess what? Jesus wanted to be great too. Did you know that? Not in the same way as James and John, but Jesus wanted greatness. In John chapter 17, when we read that high priestly prayer that Jesus offers up to God on behalf of himself, he says, "Father, glorify your Son with the glory which I had with you before the world even began." He wanted to be great with God back up in heaven. But he knew he had to be prepared first to go through those final moments of preparation. And so he says, "Not my will, but your will be done." He had to drink the cup. And there are going to be times in our life in which the same thing is tasked upon us when we're going to have to drink the cup. Turn with me real quick to 1 Peter. 1 Peter is an amazing letter that was really needed at that time. Peter's writing to a group of people who are going through quite a lot in their life, to say the least. I mean, they're being persecuted heavily. They're being kicked out of their hometowns, forced to move and to figure out a new way of life. And as all of those things are going on in the historical background, Peter says this to them, which he also says to us. 1 Peter 1, verse 6. "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. You want greatness? You want glory? You want your inheritance? It's going to have to come through fire. You're going to have to be prepared. You're going to have to be refined. That's when you can truly be great. And James and John were absolutely going to learn this. Jesus tells them, you are going to learn to drink this cup, to be baptized with this. It's kind of interesting that it's these two characters that he says that to. You ever thought about it, how James and John are really the bookends of the apostolic persecution back in that day? James was the first apostle who was martyred. In Acts chapter 12, you see Herod put James to death, something that would have sent ripple effects through the Christian community at the time. John lasts a good while longer, though. He's not directly killed early on for his faith, but no doubt he has to face persecution along the way and writes until he gets old. They learned what it was like to drink this cup in their own ways, in their own times. We're going to too. To kind of steal a phrase that Mike likes to use, sometimes we want the crown without and before the cross. And Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, and then you can be great. But even though Jesus teaches them this lesson, which is profoundly important, the main message that Jesus is trying to get across to them, based on what they've asked him, is the last lesson in this passage, the last thing we'll talk about tonight. That his greatness is found not in just being great, but in serving. Read the rest of this passage in Mark chapter 10 with me and pick up in verse 41. When the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called to them himself and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. Whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Now, in these last moments of this passage, as Jesus instructs them about true greatness and how it goes hand in hand with serving, he says, first off, if you do happen to have some greatness here on this earth right now, don't take advantage of it. Like, don't abuse that power. Don't lord it over other people. That's what he says there in verse 42. That's kind of the way that the world works. The second you get some power, the second you rise up into that vice president position, you're going to start stamping out on people. You're going to stomp them before your feet, and that's what you see a lot of people do. And unfortunately, sometimes you see that mentality even make its way into the church sometimes. When you look out at the religious world all around us, you see people who do have leadership positions that are put on a pedestal, whether it's preachers or pastors or elders or fill in the blank. They're kind of looked up to and people revere them. And you see some of them choose to take advantage of their position. And that should never happen here. And if you see that from any of the leadership, make sure to call that out. So don't lord authority over people, whether it's on an individual level, whether it's on a corporate level when it comes to the church. No, instead, be focused on whatever your position is, being a servant. That's what true leadership is about. It's about service. All the prerequisites for true greatness are found in the attributes of being a servant: humility, love, hard work. Instead of focusing on privilege and respect, Jesus teaches them, why don't you focus instead on hard work and willing service? That's going to be most important. That's going to lead you to being great. And Jesus himself, as he ends off this passage, says, look, I'm the model for this. You hold me up in high regard, but see the way that I act. Jesus is our model. I've probably talked about this before, but one of my favorite illustrations of this concept is in John chapter 13, when Jesus is washing his disciples' feet. I mean, that story just kind of baffles my mind a little bit. When Jesus knows everything that's about to happen to him, how his death is right around the corner, he's not focused on that. No, he's focused on his disciples and serving them and passing on lessons of service to them for them to take going forward. Wash feet. Additionally, just throughout Jesus' life, you see him as a servant. He serves other people through healing them, through teaching them. When he was dog tired, when his throat was sore, he still went on and he worked. He taught people who the world looked at as not being worthy of any sort of service. Jesus didn't care about that. He served them anyway. And because he is our model, it's now put on to us. Hey, you want to be great? You be servants just like Jesus. He is our model. And so we are servants in return. And there's many ways in which we can do that, many ways we can show service. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because it would be a very long list, but just some very general principles to think about. Look for people who are in need, who do need your help and your service. Open your eyes. Sometimes that's the first step. We don't have our eyes open to what's going on around us, but there are people all around you who do need help physically, monetarily, emotionally, spiritually. Be willing and ready to offer yourself up for that. Place others before yourself. Like what's said over in the book of Philippians, let nothing be done from what? From selfish ambition, from conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each of you esteem others better than yourself. Don't look out just for your own interests or needs, but the interests and needs of other people. As I might colloquially say, give other people the bigger slice of cake. You ever kind of dealt with that before in your life? How you have two pieces of cake that are cut and you're kind of thinking, all right, which one's bigger? Because I want the bigger piece. No, the whole message of Jesus' life is, hey, give other people the bigger piece. It could range from small things like that to the biggest things in your life. Place others before yourself. And if you're having a hard time figuring out how to do that, if you're opening your eyes but you can't really see anything, then ask. I mean, sometimes it's really as simple as that. If you don't know, then ask how you might be able to serve other people because you don't always know until you ask. And let me say, that can be on an individual level. That could also be what's going on in this group right here, right now. Ask for ways in which you might be able to help this group run. Because there are people here that are working, people who have tasks to go out and to work to make sure this place runs as it's supposed to, and they could always use help. Ask if you might be able to help. Ask if you might be able to serve, whatever capacity that might be, because there is work to be done in every realm. And lastly, what is our motive for this? Well, our motive, of course, is to be like Jesus, to be true disciples, to follow him because he is our model, but also our desire to obtain eternal life and the greatness that comes from that. And with that idea in mind, I want to read one last passage this evening. Turn with me to the book of Luke, Luke chapter 14. We'll finish off here. And this is a passage with kind of a similar principle that Jesus is trying to teach from Mark chapter 10. He just kind of spins it in a different way. This time he uses a parable, some different illustrations. But Luke chapter 14, start with me in verse 7. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man. And then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he also said to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just or the righteous. And that really is the key phrase I want to leave you with. You shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just or righteous. Instead of focusing on the best seat, the best position, best place, focus on being a servant, because then you're going to get rewarded with greatness and eternity, and that is far greater. So when James and John come and they ask Jesus, hey, we want you to do for us whatever it is that we ask, and he says, okay, what do you want me to do for you? Instead of saying what they said, instead they should have asked Jesus, we really want you to make us servants. I think he would have happily obliged to that. You know, the title of this lesson and really the inspiration from this lesson comes from one of the songs that we sing, which is one of my all-time favorite songs. And we're going to sing it here in just a moment. But I want to leave off with these lyrics, and I hope that as we sing this, we can truly mean this in our lives. Make me a servant just like your son, for he was a servant. Please make me one. Make me a servant, do what you must do. To make me a servant, make me like you. Make me a servant, take all my pride, for I would be lowly, humble inside. Giving to others with all that I do and love for my brother, make me like you. Make me a servant filled by your might, and may all my labors shine with your light. Show me your footsteps and what I should do for now and forever. Make me like you. These are amazing words, and I hope that we truly will mean those things. That we will come before Jesus and that we will ask him to make us servants. That we won't be focused on the world's definition of greatness, that we will be focused on Jesus' definition of greatness. The road may be hard, but we know that we are being refined for a greatness that comes in eternity. And if you're not a servant of Jesus Christ right now, if you're not a disciple of his, that choice remains open to you this evening. And if we can help you in that endeavor, we would love to. If there's anything that we can do for you, let it be known as we stand, as we sing this invitation song.